May the Lord's peace embrace you, His light strengthen your steps, and His love never leave your heart. Welcome to God's hidden plan, where each story from the Bible is more than history, it is a living message for you today. The first fugitive. Have you ever wondered about the very first murderer in human history? A man whose name has echoed through millennia, becoming synonymous with jealousy, betrayal, and a brother's blood crying out from the ground. His story is not just a crime report from the dawn of time, it is a foundational tragedy, an act whose shadow stretches over all of humanity's earliest days. We speak, of course, of Cain, the firstborn son of Adam and Eve. He didn't just kill his brother Abel, he birthed a lineage that the Bible itself describes as cursed. But here is the question, the profound and haunting mystery that has captivated scholars, theologians, and believers for centuries. What happened to Cain's children? Where did his bloodline, a lineage founded on violence, ultimately go? And why does the Bible, after giving us a tantalizing glimpse of his descendants, allow their fate to become shrouded in such deep and perplexing mystery? Tonight, we are journeying back to the dawn of creation, to a world still new and raw. We will dive deep into the ancient, powerful verses of the book of Genesis to uncover the chilling story of Cain's cursed bloodline. This is a tale of rebellion against God, of a swift and terrible divine judgment, and of a legacy that seems to simply vanish into the sands of time. This is more than just a story about one man's horrific sin. It is an ancient enigma that reshaped the course of humanity's earliest history, setting two distinct paths for mankind. Stick with me, because this journey will take you deeper into the foundational stories of our world than you ever imagined. In the beginning, before great nations rose and fell, before empires were even a dream, one single act of violence set a family and an entire bloodline on a collision course with divine reckoning. A tale of two brothers. To understand the darkness of Cain's crime, we must first step back into the light of the world's beginning. Let us journey back to a time before the murder, to a world still fresh and pristine from the Creator's hands. Picture Eden, not just a garden, but a perfect synthesis of heaven and earth. A paradise where pristine rivers flowed with clean water, where every tree bore perfect, life-giving fruit, and where humanity walked in a state of open and unbroken harmony with God. Adam and Eve, the first man and the first woman, live in this sacred space. Their work is not toil but worship, tending the garden as an act of joyful co-creation with the one who made them. Their life is one of breathtaking intimacy with God, a divine communion unmarred by sin, shame, or fear. But this perfection is shattered. After their fall from grace, their rebellion against their Creator, they are cast out of Eden. The gates are closed behind them, guarded by a flaming sword. Their story, and the story of all humanity, takes a new and more difficult turn. They now live in a world of struggle and mortality, but it is also in this new world that they become parents. Their firstborn son is Cain. The Bible tells us he became a worker of the soil, a farmer, a man whose life was tied to the earth, wrestling sustenance from the ground. Later, their second son, Abel, is born. He becomes a shepherd, a tender of flocks, a man whose life is lived under the vast, open sky, watching over the creatures God had made. We can imagine Adam and Eve, their faces still holding a memory of paradise, but now etched with the lines of hardship, cradling their sons. In Cain, and then in Abel, they see hope, a future, a new beginning for the human family. We can picture the two brothers growing up in this primordial world, their bond forged in a shared, unique experience. They are the first siblings, navigating a relationship for which there is no precedent. Cain works the fields, his hands in the dirt, while Abel tends the flocks, his eyes on the horizon. Their bond is strong, yet as we will see, tragically fragile. In this new world outside of Eden, the act of bringing an offering to God becomes the ultimate expression of worship. It is a way to acknowledge the Creator as the source of all life and provision, a way to honor Him with the very first fruits of one's labor. Cain and Abel, raised in the knowledge of the God who had walked with their parents in the garden, both understand this sacred duty. The day comes when they are to bring their gifts before the Lord. It is a moment of sacred devotion, a test not of the value of the gift, but of the state of the heart that brings it. Can you imagine it? Being part of the very first family, carrying the immense weight of humanity's future on your shoulders, preparing to offer the results of your hard labor back to the one who made you? The stage is set for a moment of profound communion. But something is about to go terribly, horribly wrong. As Cain gathers the fruit of his fields, a subtle tension hangs in the air. A shadow begins to form in his heart, a darkness that will not only fracture his family but will birth a cursed bloodline, a lineage whose mysterious fate remains one of the Bible's greatest and most unsettling enigmas, the crouching sin. Now, here is where the story of the first family turns dark, where a single moment of worship becomes the catalyst for the first act of human-on-human violence. Imagine the scene, a makeshift altar, perhaps a simple pile of stones, erected under the vast and watchful sky. Smoke rises from two separate offerings. Cain, the farmer, has brought an offering from his harvest, some of the fruit of the soil. Abel, the shepherd, has brought the very best of what he has, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. It is a moment of truth, a bearing of two souls before their Creator, and in that moment, a divine judgment is rendered. The Bible tells us that the Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. The smoke from Abel's sacrifice rises straight and bright to the heavens, a sign of acceptance, while the smoke from Cain's offering smolders and drifts weakly along the ground. Why? Why was one accepted and the other rejected? The Bible doesn't explicitly state that Cain's offering was inferior in quality. Instead, it hints that the issue was with the state of Cain's heart. The New Testament later clarifies this, stating that Abel's offering was made by faith. Abel brought his best, an offering that represented a genuine heart of gratitude and devotion. Cain, it seems, brought an offering out of mere obligation, his heart not truly in the act. His gift was a formality, not a sacrifice. Cain's reaction is immediate and visceral. His face falls. He is not contrite. He is angry. His heart begins to burn with a toxic mixture of searing jealousy toward his brother and wounded pride before his God. He sees Abel's acceptance as a personal rejection, a slight against his honor and his status as the firstborn. And in this critical moment, God himself intervenes. He does not smite Cain for his anger. He graciously condescends to speak with him, to warn him, to offer him a way back. God says to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted?" It is a direct and merciful plea, an assurance that the path to acceptance is still open. But then the warning becomes more urgent, more terrifying. God gives Cain a vivid, chilling personification of the evil that is brewing in his heart. But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Imagine that image. Sin is not an abstract concept. It is a predatory beast, a demon lurking in the shadows, waiting for a moment of weakness to pounce and devour him. God is giving Cain a choice, a divine command, and the power to overcome the darkness rising within him. It is a final, grace-filled chance to turn back from the precipice. But Cain, blinded by his envy and rage, ignores the divine warning. The crouching beast of sin pounces, and he gives in completely. The Bible describes the next moment with horrifying simplicity. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. He lures his own brother into a place of isolation and strikes him down. This is not just a crime of passion. It is the first murder in history, a premeditated act of fratricide that shatters the sacred bond of family and stains the new earth with innocent blood. It is an irreversible act, a deep wound slashed into the very fabric of humanity. Cain's choice to surrender to the crouching sin sets him and all of his future descendants on a dark and tragic path of divine judgment, a path that will echo through all subsequent generations. He now stands over his brother's lifeless body, the blood seeping into the ground that he himself works, his face a terrible mask of fear, defiance, and a dawning, horrifying realization of what he has done. This is more than a family feud. It is a cosmic rebellion against God's order, and it has just given birth to a cursed bloodline, the mark of mercy and judgment. The aftermath of the murder is immediate and chilling. The field falls silent, the crime witnessed only by God and the earth itself. But this silence is not empty, it is accusatory. The very ground, which was created to give life, has now been forced to drink the first innocent blood, and it cries out. A divine voice, like the rumbling of distant thunder, breaks the silence, confronting the murderer. God's question to Cain is not one of ignorance, but one that demands accountability. "Where is your brother Abel?" Cain's response is one of the most infamous lines in all of Scripture. He does not fall to his knees in repentance. He does not confess his terrible sin. Instead, he deflects, he lies, and he responds with a sneering, defiant question of his own. "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" With this single sentence, Cain compounds his sin. He not only rejects his responsibility for his brother, but he rejects the very idea of human community, of mutual care, of the bonds that are meant to hold the human family together. This defiant answer seals his fate. God's response is swift and terrible, revealing that nothing is hidden from his sight. "What have you done?" the voice thunders. "Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." God then pronounces the judgment, a curse that is intrinsically linked to Cain's crime. "Now you are under a curse, and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." The very source of Cain's identity, the soil he tilled, will now be his enemy. He is sentenced to a life of exile, of alienation, alienated from the earth, from his family, and most terribly, from the presence of God. It is only now, when faced with the consequences, that Cain's defiance shatters, replaced not by remorse, but by self-pitying fear. "My punishment is more than I can bear," he cries out. "Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." He fears the vengeance of others, the endless cycle of violence that he himself has begun. And here, in this moment of deserved judgment, we witness a stunning and mysterious act of divine mercy. God does not abandon Cain completely. He places a mark upon him. The Bible does not say what this mark was, but its purpose is clear. It was not to curse him further, but to protect him. It was a divine sign, a warning to all others that to kill Cain would be to invite God's own vengeance 7 times over. This mark is a profound paradox. It is a sign of Cain's sin, a permanent reminder of his crime, but it is also a sign of God's grace, a protection that allows the first murderer to live out his days. The world has been irrevocably changed. Where Eden was once a paradise of communion, the world for Cain is now a place of toil, exile, and wandering. His bloodline, the first lineage to be born and named on earth, begins under this strange and terrible shadow, a legacy forever intertwined with rebellion, judgment, and a mysterious, unmerited grace. Head bowed, bearing his mark, Cain walks away from his family, away from the land of his birth, and into the land of Nod, a name which means wandering, forever a fugitive from the presence of the Lord. His journey begins, but his story does not end here, for in this land of exile, he will have children, and they will carry his cursed and complicated legacy forward. But where do they go? That is the mystery we are chasing, a legacy in the dust. But here, as Cain wanders into the land of Nod, the biblical narrative presents us with a fascinating and perplexing question, an anomaly that has puzzled scholars and theologians for centuries. What exactly happened to Cain's children? After establishing Cain's curse and his exile, the book of Genesis does something remarkable. It gives us a brief but detailed glimpse into his descendants. It lists his son, Enoch, his grandson, Irad, and so on for several generations, culminating in a man named Lamech and his children. But then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the story of this lineage fades, and they seem to vanish completely from the biblical narrative. Why would the Bible take the time to name these individuals, to list their lineage, if they are not part of God's primary covenant plan? And what does it truly mean for an entire bloodline to be cursed? Is it a genetic trait, a spiritual state, or a historical destiny? Imagine a scholar in a candlelit study, poring over ancient scrolls and genealogical charts. A scroll is unrolled, revealing the names from Genesis chapter 4, Enoch, Irad, Mehujael, Methushael, Lamech. And then, nothing. The line stops. It does not connect to the Great Flood. It does not connect to Noah. It simply disappears into the dust of antediluvian history. This anomaly has sparked endless debate. Cain's descendants are described as innovators, pioneers of civilization. His son, Enoch, is credited with building the first city. Lamech's sons are the progenitors of those who live in tents and raise livestock, those who play musical instruments like the harp and flute, and those who forge tools out of bronze and iron. This is the dawn of urban life, of animal husbandry, of art, and of technology. These are the foundational achievements of human civilization. Yet, all of this innovation comes from the line that is explicitly separated from the presence of God. This raises a haunting question. Did Cain's cursed bloodline ever truly find a home? Or was their city building, their art, their technology just a frantic attempt to create a new paradise for themselves, a man-made substitute for the Eden their ancestor had lost? The Bible hints at their worldly achievements but leaves their ultimate spiritual state and their final destiny completely unclear. The silence is deafening. Did this entire branch of the human family, with all its accomplishments, simply perish in the Great Flood? Or did their influence, their curse, somehow survive? The text provides no easy answers, making the story of Cain's descendants one of the Bible's greatest and most profound mysteries. It is a story of a lost legacy, a branch of the human tree that grew, blossomed with culture, and was then inexplicably cut off. Echoes in myth and stone. Let's dive into the swirling vortex of possibilities and theories that have sought to explain the mystery of Cain's lost lineage. At our symbolic roundtable, theologians, archaeologists, and historians of myth debate the fate of these first city builders, their voices echoing with centuries of speculation. One prominent theory suggests that the line of Cain was not entirely wiped out, but was gradually absorbed into other tribes and peoples over many generations. In this view, their curse was not a permanent, supernatural stain, but a state of social and spiritual exile that could be diluted over time through intermarriage and cultural assimilation. Proponents of this theory often point to the archaeological evidence from early Mesopotamian civilization. The rise of the first cities in the Fertile Crescent, places like Eridu and Uruk, involved incredible feats of social organization, agriculture, and technology. Some scholars have proposed that these early urban centers, which seem to appear with remarkable sophistication, could be the historical echo of the city-building culture attributed to Cain's descendants. Perhaps Cain's people did not vanish, but instead became the founders of the great, and often godless, civilizations that would later clash with the line of Abraham. Their legacy, in this view, is the legacy of human civilization itself, a story of incredible achievement often built in defiance of, or indifference to, God. Another theory, which is far more speculative and controversial, claims that Cain's bloodline did, in fact, survive the Great Flood. Since the Bible is clear that only Noah and his family were on the ark, this theory requires some creative interpretation. Some ancient traditions suggest that the curse of Cain's line survived through the wife of one of Noah's sons, perhaps Ham. This would explain the perceived continuation of rebellion and wickedness in the post-flood world. Following this line of thought, some have attempted to connect Cain's descendants to later biblical villains figures like Nimrod, the great and prideful builder of Babel, or even the idolatrous Canaanite tribes that Israel was commanded to drive out of the Promised Land. The idea is that Cain's spiritual curse, a predisposition towards violence, pride, and rebellion, lingered in the human gene pool. However, these ideas rely almost entirely on guesswork and later traditions, not on the biblical text itself. Genesis is very deliberate in its structure, creating a clear break with the flood and focusing exclusively on the covenant line that descends from Adam through his other son, Seth, to Noah. The Bible's own silence is perhaps the most powerful clue. It invites us to ask a different kind of question. Why mention Cain's children and their accomplishments at all if their story is ultimately a dead end? Is their legacy meant to be a warning about the fruit of sin, a tragedy about wasted potential, or something else entirely? The text gives us just enough information to be intrigued, to see a vibrant and developing culture, but then cuts the story short. It's as if to say, this path, for all its worldly success, does not lead to life. The echoes of Cain's line may be found in ancient myth and stone, but their true story, as told by the Bible, is one of theological importance, not historical completeness. The line of man. So, after exploring the archaeological hints and the speculative theories, what is the most accepted and textually grounded explanation for the inclusion and subsequent disappearance of Cain's lineage? Most biblical scholars and theologians agree that the genealogy of Cain in Genesis chapter 4 is included for a very specific and powerful theological purpose, to serve as a dramatic and tragic contrast to the lineage of Adam and Eve's third son, Seth, who represents the line of God's covenant hope. The curse pronounced upon Cain that he would be a restless wanderer and that his labor would be unfruitful is shown to extend symbolically to his descendants. They may try to defy the curse, but they cannot escape it. Consider their achievements. Cain is cursed to be a wanderer, so his son Enoch builds a city, a powerful act of defiance, an attempt to create a permanent home and security in a world where he is meant to have none. They are alienated from the life-giving soil, so they become innovators in other fields. Lamech's son Jabal becomes the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock, finding a new way to live off the land. His other son, Jubal, invents music, creating art and beauty to fill the spiritual void. And Tubal-Cain forges tools of bronze and iron, creating technology and weapons, instruments of both progress and violence. These are the hallmarks of human civilization, but in the context of Genesis, they are presented as the achievements of a people living apart from the presence of God. Their progress is impressive, but it is ultimately a human-centered attempt to build a world without God. The genealogy culminates in the figure of Lamech, who takes 2 wives, the first recorded instance of polygamy, and writes a chilling poem, A Song of the Sword, in which he boasts of killing a man for wounding him. His boast is a terrifying escalation of his ancestor Cain's sin. While Cain was at least fearful of the consequences, Lamech is arrogant and vengeful, claiming for himself a right to vengeance that is even greater than God's protection of Cain. This shows the downward spiral of sin, the deepening of the curse through the generations. In the ancient Near East, genealogies were vitally important. They were not just family trees. They were statements of legacy, identity, and destiny. The Bible includes Cain's detailed genealogy to make a profound point. This is the potential of humanity when it chooses its own path, apart from God. It can be impressive, innovative, and culturally rich, but it is ultimately fleeting and leads to greater violence and pride. Immediately after detailing the line of Cain, the Bible pivots in chapter 5 to the line of Seth, whose name means appointed. Eve declares, God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him. Seth's line is the line of promise. It is from his descendants, like Enoch, a different Enoch from Cain's son, who walked faithfully with God, and ultimately Noah, that God will preserve humanity. The biblical narrative, therefore, presents 2 lines of man. The line of Cain ends before the flood, suggesting that their civilization, for all its innovations, was corrupt and perished in the waters of judgment. The line of Seth is preserved. Cain's story is a cautionary tale, a powerful illustration that sin has generational consequences, but that God, in his mercy, always preserves a line of hope for those who seek him. The city of the wanderer. While the book of Genesis gives us the essential framework, its account of Cain's descendants is brief and stark. To gain a richer, more imaginative picture of this lost lineage, we can turn to ancient, non-canonical texts like the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees. These apocryphal sources, while not considered scripture, were written by ancient Jewish authors who, like us, wrestled with the mysteries of Genesis. They took the few names provided, Enoch, Irad, Lamech, and fleshed them out into vivid characters, painting a picture of a vibrant, creative, but ultimately tragic civilization. Let's focus on the figure of Lamech, the 7th from Adam in the line of Cain. Genesis records his infamous Song of the Sword, a short but brutal poem he recites to his 2 wives, Ada and Zillah. He boasts, I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. These apocryphal texts expand on this. They portray Lamech not just as a polygamist, but as a violent warlord, a conqueror who embodies the escalating pride and bloodlust of his lineage. His song is not one of remorse, but of arrogant self-justification. He takes the protective mercy God showed to Cain and twists it into a license for disproportionate and ruthless vengeance. He is the culmination of a culture built on strength and power, rather than faith and humility. And what of the city built by Cain's son, Enoch? Genesis simply states that Cain was building a city, and he named it after his son Enoch. But the later traditions see this as a profoundly symbolic act. Cain was cursed to be a wanderer, a fugitive with no place to rest. The act of building a city is a direct rebellion against this curse. It is an attempt to create a man-made security, a fortress against the judgment of God. Imagine this city rising from the dust of an unyielding land, a monument to human pride and ingenuity. It would have been a place of incredible innovation, as his descendants mastered metallurgy, music, and animal husbandry. It might have been a place of great beauty and culture, filled with the sound of Jubal's harp and the marvels of Tubal-Cain's forge. But according to these ancient traditions, it was a city without God. It was a civilization built on a foundation of murder and exile. Its culture, for all its sophistication, was spiritually lost. The curse of Cain was not that his descendants were unintelligent or incapable. On the contrary, they were brilliant. Their curse was their spiritual state of separation, their legacy of rebellion. The names themselves may contain hints. Lamech's name is sometimes linked to a root meaning powerful or conqueror, hinting at his prideful and violent nature. These ancient texts, though speculative, help us understand the biblical narrative more deeply. They give flesh and blood to the forgotten characters of Cain's line. They show us a vibrant and tragic lineage, a civilization that reached for the stars with its art and technology, but whose feet were firmly planted in the blood-soaked ground of its founder. They underscore the Bible's core message, that even the most impressive human achievements, when divorced from the presence and blessing of God, are ultimately built on sand. They are a story of a people who had a legacy, but one that was apart from God's redemptive plan for humanity. A civilization without God. Let's step back one last time and consider the big picture. The story of Cain's cursed bloodline is not just about one tragic family at the dawn of history. It is a profound and timeless parable about the consequences of sin and the nature of human civilization itself when it attempts to build itself apart from God. In the pristine world described in the opening of Genesis, humanity's purpose was to live in communion with God, to work in harmony with creation. But Cain's sin introduced a radical break, a new path for humanity to follow. The world of Cain's descendants is marked by incredible creativity and longevity. Humans in this antediluvian age lived for centuries, allowing for the rapid development of culture and technology. But Cain's line shows how sin can distort both of these gifts. Why did they build cities, invent musical instruments, and forge tools from metal? On one level, this is simply the natural progression of human ingenuity. But on a deeper, theological level, it can be seen as a direct response to their spiritual condition. Cain was cursed to be a wanderer, alienated from the fruitful earth and hidden from God's presence. His descendants seem to spend their entire existence trying to overcome this curse through their own efforts. They build cities to create the security and sense of place that Cain lost. They invent music and art, perhaps to fill the profound silence left by the absence of communion with God. They forge weapons of bronze and iron, creating their own power and defense in a world where they cannot rely on divine protection. Their civilization is a monumental effort to prove their own worth, to make a name for themselves, a rebellion rooted in the same pride that led their ancestor to kill his brother. This story serves as a powerful precursor to the later story of the Tower of Babel, another instance where humanity unites in its technological prowess to build a city and a tower in defiance of God. The concept of a curse in this context raises deep questions. Was it merely Cain's personal punishment, or was it a spiritual state, a brokenness that was passed down to his children? The narrative suggests the latter. The escalating violence of Lamech shows that the seed of sin planted by Cain grew into a mighty and poisonous tree in his lineage. Theirs was a world rich in culture, but poor in spirit. Then comes the flood. The biblical narrative makes a stark and deliberate choice. It declares that the entire world had become corrupt and filled with violence, and God chose to reset the story of humanity, preserving only the righteous line of Noah, a descendant of Seth. The line of Cain, with all its cities and inventions, is washed away. Their legacy is erased. The story of Cain's lineage challenges us to consider the ultimate cost of rebellion. It suggests that a civilization without God, no matter how technologically advanced or culturally sophisticated, is ultimately unsustainable. It is a haunting lesson about the choice between building a kingdom for man and living as a citizen in the kingdom of God. A tale of two lines. So, as we emerge from the shadows of this ancient mystery, what have we ultimately learned? The story of Cain's cursed bloodline, marked by rebellion and judgment, serves as a powerful and tragic illustration of the consequences of sin. Yet, their story is also one of incredible human potential, a testament to the creativity and ingenuity that God instilled in humanity, even when that creativity is divorced from its divine source and used for self-glorification. The forgotten figures of this lineage, the city builder Enoch, the violent poet Lamech, are not just names on a list. They reveal the progression of a legacy, a culture of brilliant innovation tragically tainted by pride and violence. The Bible gives us this genealogy to paint a clear and unforgettable contrast between two paths available to humanity at the dawn of time. One is the path of Cain, the line of man. It is a path of worldly achievement, of building cities and forging empires. But it is a path that leads away from the presence of God and ultimately ends in judgment and destruction. The other path is that of Seth, the line of faith. It is a quieter path, marked not by boasting songs of vengeance, but by the simple, profound testimony of men like his descendant Enoch, who walked faithfully with God. It is this line, the one that chooses to call upon the name of the Lord, that God preserves through the cataclysm of the flood. Noah, the man who finds favor in God's eyes, is a direct descendant of Seth. The ark he builds, a simple vessel of faith and obedience, ultimately outlast the grand, prideful cities of Cain's descendants. The Bible's core truth, illustrated so powerfully in this tale of two lines, is clear. Sin leads to separation and ruin, but God's mercy always provides a way back, a path of redemption for those who will choose it. Cain's story is not a complete historical record of his people. It is a divine warning, a foundational parable urging us to choose the path of righteousness, humility, and faith. The scriptures are not a book of speculation, but a divine narrative designed to guide us toward a life lived in communion with our Creator. The two paths laid out at the very beginning of human history remain the two paths available to us today. The choice, what, then, is the true and final purpose of Cain's story? Why does the Bible force us to look upon this first murder, this first cursed bloodline? It is not to obsess over tracking the fate of his children or to get lost in speculative theories. It is to awaken us, with chilling clarity, to the devastating cost of sin and the glorious, unmerited hope of redemption. You do not need to know every detail of Lamech's life or the exact location of Enoch's city to understand the story's profound message. The lesson is etched into the very structure of Genesis. God's justice is real. The choices we make have consequences that can ripple through generations. Pride, envy, and violence lead down a path of alienation and judgment, but God's mercy is greater. The mark of Cain, a mysterious act of grace in the midst of judgment, is a testament to this. And the preservation of Seth's line is the ultimate proof that God will never abandon his plan for humanity. The cursed bloodline of Cain reminds us to choose the path of Abel's faithful offering and Seth's righteous walk over the path of Cain's jealous rage. As the sun rises over a renewed earth, a world washed clean and ready for a new beginning with Noah and his family, it symbolizes the enduring hope of redemption. The story of Cain is not the end of the story. It is the dark background against which the brilliance of God's grace shines most brightly. Now, I want to hear from you. What does Cain's story teach you about the nature of choice and its consequences? How does the mystery of his lost lineage challenge your view of God's justice and mercy? Drop your thoughts, your questions, and your insights in the comments below. Hit that like button if this deep dive into one of the Bible's oldest mysteries has given you a new perspective, and share this video with someone else who loves to explore the foundational stories of our faith. Let's keep this conversation alive. Until next time, keep seeking God's truth, choose his path, and walk in his abundant mercy.